Hey there, I'm Jack Thompson from Creepy Whispers. Today, we're diving into a story that'll blow your mind. Let's get started. I never imagined that a simple summer job could turn my world upside down. It was supposed to be just another normal year in our little Midwest town, you know? I had just turned 17, and, like everyone around here, I got a job in the harvest to make some money. We grow up hearing stories from the older folks about how important it is to help during harvest season, like it's some kind of rite of passage or something. But man, if I had known what was coming, I swear I would have stayed home playing video games. It all started on a Monday in July. The heat was unbearable, and I was sweating like a pig while harvesting corn in a remote field. I remember looking at the horizon and seeing some dark clouds forming. I thought, great, it's going to rain, but then I noticed something strange. Jerry, a colleague who was working a few rows ahead, suddenly disappeared. Like, 1 second he was there, the next, poof. I thought he had bent down to tie his shoelace or something, so I kept working. But after about 15 minutes, I started to worry. I called out for him, but nothing. I went to where I had last seen him and found no trace. No footprints, nothing on the ground. It was as if Jerry had never been there. At that moment, I got a bit scared, you know, but I tried not to freak out. I thought maybe Jerry had gotten sick from the heat and left without saying anything. It happens, right? I decided to get back to work, but that weird feeling wouldn't leave my head. When I finished my shift and went back to town, I found out that Jerry hadn't shown up at home. His parents were desperate, calling everyone. That's when things got really tense. The police were called. They searched the field, but nothing. It was as if Jerry had evaporated into thin air. In the following days, the whole town was in an uproar. Everyone was talking about Jerry's disappearance, speculating 1,000 theories. But the strangest thing was how some adults reacted, especially the older folks in town, you know? They had this weird look on their faces when someone brought up the subject, as if they knew something they didn't want to tell. I tried not to pay attention, thought it was just the more conservative people wanting to hush up the case so as not to scare away tourists from the upcoming agricultural fair. But then, on Thursday, it happened again. Sarah, a girl who worked in a field on the other side of town, vanished the same way, without a trace, without anyone seeing anything. That's when the real panic began. Sarah's disappearance was the last straw. The entire town panicked. Parents started forbidding their children from working in the fields. People were locking their doors even during the day. It was as if a blanket of fear had covered our quiet little town. I tried to stay calm, but I confess I was terrified. Every time I looked at the cornfields, I felt a shiver down my spine. It was as if those huge plants were hiding some sinister secret. One night, I couldn't stand staying at home anymore and went out for a walk, trying to clear my head. I ended up at ZE's bar, where the older folks usually gather. I shouldn't have been there, but nobody cared about my age that day. The atmosphere was heavy, everyone talking in hushed tones, as if they were afraid of being overheard. That's when I heard a conversation that left me cold. Old Johnson, who must have been about 80, was whispering to Z, "It's happening again, just like in '52. They're back. When they realized I was listening, they turned white as sheets and changed the subject immediately. But that kept hammering in my head. What were they talking about? Who were they? And what the hell had happened in 1952? After that night at the bar, I couldn't sleep properly anymore. I kept thinking about what old Johnson had said, trying to piece together this crazy puzzle. I decided I needed to investigate on my own. I started asking questions to everyone, especially the older folks in town. Most of them changed the subject or pretended they didn't know anything. But little by little, I gathered some information here and there. It seems that in 1952, something similar had happened. Young people disappearing in the cornfields, the town in panic, and then nothing. As if everyone had agreed to pretend nothing had happened. One afternoon, I was heading home after another day of asking questions without getting many answers when I noticed something strange. A group of men, including the mayor and the sheriff, was coming out of the town hall looking grim. They seemed to be discussing something serious, but when they saw me, they shut up immediately. The sheriff even tried to smile at me, but you could see it was forced. I got the impression they were hiding something big, and worse, that they knew exactly what was happening to the missing young people. At that moment, I felt a mix of anger and fear. Anger because they might be protecting God knows what instead of helping us, and fear because, well, what if I was next? That night, I couldn't stand still anymore. I decided to go to the cornfield where Jerry had disappeared. I know it sounds crazy, but I needed to see with my own eyes, try to understand what was going on. I grabbed a flashlight, filled a backpack with water and some cereal bars, and snuck out of the house. The path to the field never seemed so long. Every shadow, every little noise made me jump. When I reached the edge of the cornfield, I hesitated. The plants swayed in the wind, making a noise that sounded like whispers. I swallowed hard and entered. Man, walking through a cornfield at night is the scariest thing I've ever done. The flashlight barely lit the way, and I had the constant feeling that someone was watching me. I walked for a while, not knowing exactly what I was looking for. That's when I heard a strange noise, like a low hum. I thought it was my imagination, but the sound kept getting louder. Suddenly, I saw a strange light between the plants. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It was a bluish light, kind of pulsating. My heart raced. I knew I should run, but my feet seemed glued to the ground. The light kept getting stronger, the hum louder, and then, in the blink of an eye, everything went dark and silent again. It was as if someone had pressed a button and turned everything off. I stood there, shaking, not knowing what to do. My flashlight had gone out, and no matter how much I pressed the button, it wouldn't turn on. I started to panic for real. I tried to go back the same way, but in the dark, all the corridors of the cornfield looked the same. I walked for what seemed like hours, completely lost and terrified. When I finally managed to get out of the cornfield, the sky was already lightening. I ran home as if the devil was on my heels. Only when I got home, closed the door, and threw myself on the bed did I notice something strange. My watch showed it was 6 in the morning, but I was sure I had left the house around midnight. It wasn't possible that I had been in that field for 6 hours. It felt like at most 2 hours had passed. That's when I noticed another strange thing. My clothes and shoes were completely clean and dry, as if I hadn't just spent the whole night walking in a dew-damp field. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened. Had I imagined it all? In the following days, I was in a state of shock. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, or what I thought had happened. Who would believe me? I wasn't even sure if I could trust my own memory. But one thing I knew, something very strange was going on in that town. The worst part was that it seemed like everyone knew something, but nobody said anything. It was as if the entire town was participating in a big conspiracy of silence. A week after my nocturnal walk, things got even weirder. The disappearances stopped out of nowhere, just as they had started. And the craziest part, Jerry and Sarah reappeared. Out of nowhere, as if they had never disappeared. They were at home, saying they didn't remember anything from the time they were missing. The families were too relieved to ask many questions, and the authorities seemed more than happy to close the case without further investigation. But I noticed something in their eyes, Jerry's and Sarah's. It was an empty, distant look, as if a part of them had stayed. I don't know where. I tried to talk to Jerry and Sarah, but it was like hitting a wall. They smiled, said everything was fine, but their eyes. Man, those eyes gave me the creeps. They weren't the same as before. It was as if they had seen something that changed them forever. And the rest of the town? Well, it was bizarre how quickly everything went back to normal. People went back to working in the fields. Gossip about the disappearances was replaced by conversations about the weather and the harvest. It was as if nothing had happened. A few months have passed since then, and I still don't understand what happened that summer. Sometimes when I look at the night sky, I have the feeling that there's something up there watching us. And when the wind blows strongly through the cornfields, I swear I can hear that hum again. Nobody talks about the disappearances anymore, about the strange lights, about anything. It's as if the whole town had made a pact of silence. But I know what I saw, what I felt. There's something strange happening here, something that goes beyond our understanding. And the worst part is that I have the feeling that it's not over. That one day, when we least expect it, it will all start again. And this time, who knows, I might be the next to disappear. Hey everyone, my name is Emily, and I've been an agricultural technology researcher for almost a decade. I want to share with you a terrifying experience I had last year while testing a new crop monitoring system. I still tremble just thinking about it. At the time, I was 32 and super excited about my work. I had just developed a revolutionary system using drones and advanced sensors to track crop growth. It was my baby, you know? I spent months working on it, refining every detail. I thought it was going to change the game in precision agriculture. Well, on a Tuesday in October, I went to a very isolated farm in the heart of Nebraska to do the final tests. The place was huge, with miles and miles of cornfields as far as the eye could see. I arrived early, around a.m. The sky was still dark and a thick fog covered the fields, giving the place a kind of sinister air. But I was too excited to care. I set up my equipment on a small observation tower in the middle of the plantation. From there, I had a panoramic view of the entire area and could control the drones. Little did I know that day would change my life forever. I started the tests as soon as the sun came up. The drones took off smoothly, buzzing over the crops like a swarm of high-tech bees. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. The sensors were capturing data on soil moisture, plant growth, nutrient levels, all that scientific stuff I loved. But then, suddenly, I noticed something strange. One of the drones started recording bizarre movements in the middle of the cornfield. It wasn't anything like what I'd seen before. It seemed almost intentional. I frowned, intrigued. I thought maybe it was some wild animal, you know, like a deer or a wild boar. But the more I observed, the weirder it got. The movements were too precise, too calculated to be just any animal. And the craziest thing is that they always happened in the blind spots of the sensors, as if, I don't know, as if something had learned to avoid detection. My heart started to race. It didn't make any sense. I decided to send more drones to the area to get a better view, but that's when things got even creepier. When the other drones arrived in the area, it was as if they had entered a crazy interference zone. The signals started to get all scrambled. The images were distorted, and the data made no sense at all. It was as if something had created an invisible bubble right there in the middle of the cornfield, you know. A bubble that messed up all my technology. I kept my eyes glued to the screens, trying to understand what was happening. God, how I wish I had turned back and left right then, but curiosity was stronger. After all, I was a scientist, right? My job was to unravel mysteries. So, I did the dumbest thing possible. I decided to go investigate personally. I grabbed my backpack with some portable equipment and started to descend the observation tower. My legs were shaking so much I thought I was going to fall at any moment. The cornfield looked much scarier up close, the plants swaying gently in the morning breeze, as if whispering secrets to each other. I swallowed hard and started walking towards where the drones had detected the anomalies. Man, if I had known what was waiting for me there, as I was making my way through the cornfield, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. You know that itch on the back of your neck you get when someone's staring at you? It was exactly that, only 1,000 times worse. The sound of dry leaves crackling under my feet seemed deafening in the silence of the plantation. Every now and then, I would hear strange cracking sounds coming from far away, as if something was moving quickly between the plants. Every time I turned to look, I saw nothing but more and more corn. After about 15 minutes of walking, I reached a small clearing. That's when my blood ran cold. On the ground, there was a perfect circle where all the plants had been flattened. It wasn't like those crop circles you see on TV, made by pranksters. No, this was different. The plants weren't broken or cut. They looked like they had been melted, as if something incredibly hot had landed there. The smell was strange too, a mixture of ozone and something metallic that I couldn't identify. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the tablet to take pictures. And that's when I heard it. A low hum, almost imperceptible, coming from all sides at once. That hum kept getting louder, as if it was approaching. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Suddenly, all my equipment went haywire. The tablet started flashing like crazy. My phone turned off by itself, and even the digital watch on my wrist went nuts, the numbers changing rapidly. It was as if a wave of energy had passed through there, frying everything electronic. And then, out of nowhere, there was a deathly silence. I couldn't even hear the wind in the corn leaves anymore. That's when I saw it. I swear by everything that's holy that I'm not making this up. About 10 meters away from me, the air started to ripple, as if it were a water mirror being disturbed. And from within this ripple, something emerged that I still can't describe properly. It was as if it was made of light and shadow at the same time, you know? It had a vaguely humanoid shape, but distorted, as if being seen through a prism. It had no face, but I felt it was observing me. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. The creature, if I can call it a creature, stood there for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Then slowly, it began to move in my direction. My body finally reacted when that thing started to approach. I turned around and ran like crazy through the cornfield. I didn't care about the plants whipping my face and arms, cutting my skin. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. I could hear a strange noise behind me, as if thousands of insects were buzzing in unison. I didn't look back even for a second. My lungs were burning, my legs were aching, but fear kept me going. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally spotted the observation tower. I climbed the stairs stumbling, almost falling several times. When I reached the top, I threw myself on the floor, panting and shaking. It took me a few minutes to gather the courage to look back. When I finally did, the cornfield looked completely normal. No sign of that strange thing, no suspicious movement. But I knew I had seen something. Something that shouldn't exist in this world. I stayed there paralyzed for hours, until the sun started to set. Only then did I find the courage to go down and leave the cursed place. I drove back to the city like a madwoman, exceeding the speed limit, and almost crashing several times. I got home and locked all the doors and windows. I spent the whole night awake, jumping at every little noise. The next day, I tried to tell my boss what had happened, but he thought I was delirious. He said it must have been stress or heat stroke. He even suggested I take a vacation. But I knew I wasn't crazy. The marks from the corn plant cuts were still on my arms and face. In the following weeks, I became obsessed with trying to understand what had happened. I went through the drone data thousands of times, looking for any evidence. Most of it was corrupted, but I managed to recover some fragments. And what I saw terrified me even more. In some frames, you could see shadows moving in impossible ways, as if bending space. In others, there were distortions in the image that seemed to form complex patterns, almost like an alien language. The more I looked, the more certain I became that I had witnessed something beyond our comprehension. I tried to go back to the farm a few times in the following weeks, always during the day and accompanied by colleagues. But we never managed to find that clearing again. It was as if it had disappeared or never existed. My colleagues started to look at me strangely, as if I were crazy. They even considered removing me from the project. I ended up quitting before they could fire me. Today, almost a year later, I still can't sleep properly. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I'm being watched. My electronic devices sometimes act up out of nowhere, turning off or showing strange symbols on the screen for a few seconds. I don't know if it's my paranoia or if that thing somehow followed me. I've thought about seeking help, a psychiatrist, maybe. But I'm afraid they'll think I'm really crazy. The worst part is the doubt. Did I really see what I think I saw? Or was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Sometimes I almost convince myself that it was all imagination. But then I remember that feeling, that being made of light and shadows staring at me, and I know it was real. Something is out there, hidden right under our noses, playing with our technology as if it were a toy. And the scariest thing is that I have no idea what they want. Well, that's it. I had never told this story to anyone before. I thought you guys, here in this forum, might understand, or at least not judge me as crazy. If anyone has gone through something similar, or has any idea what that could have been, please tell me. Because I'm running out of options. And I'm afraid of what might happen if I keep investigating on my own. I never thought a normal day at the Millbrook police station could turn my world upside down. I'm Detective Lisa Harper, born and raised in this small farming town that everyone thinks they know like the back of their hand. But that autumn morning, when the phone rang and I heard farmer Joe Wilkins' trembling voice, I realized I was about to dive into something far beyond my experience. "There's a body in the cornfield, Lisa," he said, barely able to form the words. "But it's not like anything I've ever seen before." I confess I felt a shiver run down my spine. Joe wasn't a man to scare easily. I grabbed my patrol car and rushed to the Wilkins farm. The whole way there, I kept thinking about what could be so terrible as to leave Joe in that state. When I arrived, I saw that half the town had already gathered at the edge of the cornfield. Pale faces, frightened looks. No one dared to enter. I took a deep breath, swallowed hard, and forced myself to walk between the rows of corn. The sweet smell of the ears mixed with something rotten made my stomach churn. And then I saw it. My God, how to describe that? It was a body, yes, but it looked more like a macabre doll. It was hanging on a stake, arms spread, head hanging to the side. But the worst part, it was stuffed with straw. Straw coming out of the mouth, the eyes through cuts in the skin. I'll never forget that sight. I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. My mind screamed that this couldn't be real, but the smell. That horrible smell of decomposition mixed with sweet corn left no doubt. It was too real. I forced my brain into investigation mode. After all, it was my job. I started analyzing the scene, taking photos, making notes. But something bothered me. I had a strange feeling, as if I was being watched. Every now and then, I swore I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked, it was just the corn swaying in the wind. I tried to convince myself it was just the stress of the situation, but I couldn't shake that uneasiness. After hours of collecting evidence, I returned to the station to start the real investigation. That's when things got even stranger. While researching similar cases, I stumbled upon a local legend that made my blood run cold. It spoke of an innocent man who was unjustly executed decades ago and left to rot in a cornfield like a scarecrow. They said his spirit swore revenge. Normally, I'd laugh at such a story, but after what I saw today, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was at that moment that the phone rang again. It was the sheriff, his voice tense. "Lisa, we've got another body." Same way. Cornfield on the other side of town. I felt my stomach sink. This couldn't be a coincidence. I rushed to the scene of the second crime, my head spinning. When I got there, it was like a macabre déjà vu. The same scenario, the same smell, the same chill down my spine. But this time, I noticed something different. Near the body, there were strange marks on the ground, as if someone had dragged something heavy. I followed the marks for a few meters and found a piece of old fabric stuck to a corn stalk. It looked like it was from overalls, the kind farmers wear. I kept it as evidence, but something told me it wasn't just an ordinary clue. Back at the station, I spent the whole night rummaging through old files, trying to connect the dots. That's when I found a yellowed report from almost 100 years ago. It talked about a farm worker named Ezekiel Crow, accused of a crime he swore he didn't commit. The report said he was lynched by an angry mob, and his body was left in a cornfield as a warning. The most disturbing part, the location was exactly where we found the first body today. I felt a chill in my stomach. The legend, the bodies, everything started to fit together in a way I didn't want to believe. I was so absorbed in the papers that I didn't even notice the hours passing. When I looked out the window, it was already dawning. And that's when I saw something that made me doubt my own sanity. Outside, in the station parking lot, there was a scarecrow. I swear it wasn't there when I arrived last night. It was tall, wearing old, torn overalls, very similar to the piece of fabric I found at the crime scene. I was paralyzed, looking out the window, not knowing what to do. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. It's just a scarecrow, Lisa. Someone must have put it there as a bad joke, I thought. But when I blinked, it was gone. I ran outside, looking everywhere, but there was no sign of it. Had I imagined the whole thing? I went back inside, hands shaking. I tried to convince myself it was just fatigue, that I was seeing things after a sleepless night. But I couldn't get that image out of my head. I decided I needed help. I called the sheriff and told him everything I'd discovered, including about the scarecrow in the parking lot. He was silent for a while, and then said something that scared me even more. "Lisa, I think it's time you knew the truth about our town's history." He asked me to meet him at the old Crow farm, where it all started 100 years ago. As I drove there, I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror, afraid of seeing that scarecrow following me. What did the sheriff know that I didn't? And why did I have the feeling I was walking straight into a trap? I arrived at the Crow farm with my heart in my mouth. The place had been abandoned for decades, the buildings falling apart, swallowed by vegetation. The sheriff was already there, standing near an old barn. As I approached, I noticed he looked aged, as if carrying an enormous weight on his shoulders. "Lisa," he began, "what I'm about to tell you has been passed down from generation to generation among Millbrook's founding families." He then told me a story of greed, betrayal, and a horrible crime covered up for years. Ezekiel Crow wasn't just an innocent farm worker. He had discovered that the rich families in town were stealing land from small farmers using forged documents. When he threatened to expose everything, he was silenced in the cruelest way possible. As the sheriff spoke, I felt the air getting heavier around us. The wind started to blow strongly, making the surrounding cornfield stir in a frightening way. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from inside the barn. The sheriff turned pale. "He's here," he whispered. Before I could ask who, the barn doors flew open with a bang. There, standing in the entrance, was the scarecrow I had seen in the station parking lot. But now it was moving. My God, it was alive. Its hands were claws made of twisted branches. Its eyes black holes that seemed to suck in all the light. It pointed directly at the sheriff and spoke with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "The time for reckoning has come." I was paralyzed, torn between fear and disbelief. The sheriff, trembling, fell to his knees. "Please forgive us," he cried. "We didn't know. Our ancestors. But the scarecrow advanced slowly, relentless. I knew I had to do something, but what? My gun seemed useless against that thing. It was then that I had a crazy idea. I remembered the report, the injustice committed. "Wait," I shouted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. The scarecrow stopped, turning its straw head in my direction. I swallowed hard and continued. "I know what happened to you, Ezekiel. I know about the injustice. But killing won't fix this. Let me expose the truth, make justice the right way." For a moment that seemed like an eternity, the scarecrow stood motionless, staring at me with those empty eyes. Then slowly, it raised an arm and pointed to the barn floor. I understood the message and started digging with my bare hands. It didn't take long for us to find a buried chest. Inside were old documents, evidence of the conspiracy that Ezekiel had discovered a century ago. The sheriff looked at everything in shock, murmuring, "So it was true." All true. When I turned back to the scarecrow, it had disappeared. The wind suddenly stopped, and a heavy silence fell over us. I looked at the sheriff, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice broken. I knew we had a long road ahead to correct the mistakes of the past, but for the first time since this madness began, I felt we were on the right track. In the days that followed, I dove headfirst into the investigation. With the evidence we found in the barn, we managed to unearth a web of lies and corruption that spanned generations. Entire families saw their reputations crumble overnight. Some tried to deny, others begged for mercy. The entire town seemed to be living a collective nightmare. But the strangest thing was that the murders stopped. It was as if the revelation of the truth had quenched Ezekiel's spirit's thirst for revenge. Even so, I couldn't let my guard down. Every time I passed near a cornfield, I felt that sensation of being watched. At night, I had nightmares about the scarecrow, its empty eyes haunting me. A week after we found the evidence, I received an anonymous call. The voice on the other end of the line was hoarse, almost a whisper. "Go to where it all began. At midnight. Go alone." I knew it was a terrible idea, that it could be a trap. But something inside me said I needed to go, that this was the only way to finally end this crazy story. When I arrived at the cornfield where Ezekiel's body had been left a century ago, the full moon illuminated everything with a pale, ghostly light. And there it was, the scarecrow. But this time, I didn't feel afraid. I approached slowly and, to my surprise, saw that its eyes were no longer empty. There was a deep sadness in them, a century-old pain. We stood there, face to face, in a silence that seemed to last an eternity. Then, without warning, the scarecrow began to disintegrate. The straw fell to the ground as if it were sand running through an hourglass. I saw Ezekiel's face form briefly a young man, with tired eyes and a sad smile. He nodded to me, as if thanking me, and then simply vanished into thin air. I stood there, not knowing if that had really happened, or if I had finally gone completely mad. But something had changed. The air felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from the entire town. In the months that followed, Millbrook underwent a transformation. The stolen lands were returned to the descendants of their rightful owners. Ezekiel Crow's story was finally told, and a memorial was erected in his honor. As for me, well, let's say my view of the world changed completely. I'm still a detective. I still deal with facts and evidence. But now I know there are things that go beyond our understanding. Sometimes when I pass by the old cornfield at night, I swear I see a familiar silhouette in the distance. I don't tell anyone about this, of course. Who would believe me? But I know Ezekiel is still out there, no longer as a vengeful spirit, but as a silent guardian, ensuring that justice prevails. And me? Well, I continue doing my job, but now with one eye on the world of the living and the other on what exists beyond it.